Hi there, Joy again from Joyously Handmade. Sorry, let me just get my camera stay still here. There, okay. So we're back for part 2 of this video. And what we're doing, obviously, is a night sky. I've let it dry. It's dry enough now that I can work with. And we're going to add a silhouette of some trees in the foreground. So what we've got so far, if you didn't see part 1, is we used Frisket to mask off some white spots for our stars and our moon. And then we made our little galaxy sky. And I'll just see if I can give you a good look at how that dried. As you can see, it bled into each other. It's got a nice kind of a dark, mysterious look going on. I kind of like it. What we're going to do before we start anything else is we're going to remove the Frisket. And we're doing that because obviously the stars aren't going to shine through trees, and so we want to get rid of our Frisket first. So as you can see, it comes off like so. We've got quite a lot of paint on there, so it's not making my life easy. Normally you can just kind of rub at it and it'll come off, but probably because I put so much paint on the page, it's not going to make my life easy. And I just smudged it with my own finger. So, I have heard on occasion using an elastic comes off easier because it likes to stick to itself, but that doesn't seem to work either. I have never had this problem until, of course, I'm trying to do a video on the subject, and now suddenly it's giving me a hard time. So we'll try it this way. So like I said, I'm taking these off because our trees won't allow stars to shine through them. So we need to have our stars painted over. This area in the center here, I'm actually not going to put very many trees. My plan is to have trees kind of off to each side with a gap in the center. But either way, I kind of just wanted you to see I was trying to show how easy it is to use the Frisket and take the Frisket off afterwards, but it's proving me wrong. Normally I would just rub my finger along it. I've never had so much paint come off, but I did put quite a lot of paint on the page, so it must be that there's a lot of dry pigment sitting on top of the page, because it is actually rubbing off on my fingers as I do this, so that's unusual. But then again, I've never tried to make the big galaxy night sky like this before, so it's always a new experience. It's an adventure. That's why I call my page Adventures in Menopause. Everything's an adventure. You just have to look at it the right way. Even the negative things, it's all an adventure. You learn from everything that happens. And in this case, what I've learned is that if it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong on live video. Because, you know, it can. This, by the way, is a stylus that I use for my polymer clay, which seems to be coming in very handy for this particular thing. I don't want to scratch my paper. What I did to make the stylus actually is I just got one of those big darning needles with kind of a wide flat end on it. It's not flat, but it's not sharp pointy. Anyways, and I wrapped it in polymer clay because I needed something that had a nice sharp edge on it, or a thin edge I should say, since I just said it's not sharp, for when I was working with my polymer clay. I'm not even sure why I had it sitting out on the table. I don't normally have it out when I'm painting, but I did, and it's coming in handy. Okay. Brush some of these off. So I think our stars are coming out fairly well, even after all the fuss. I've mixed up quite a large batch of black. I did want to comment on the fact that perspective-wise, when you're doing things that are silhouettes, that are landscapes. The background, the farther away something is, tends to be a little bit mistier, a little bit less defined, a little bit lighter in color, because it's just not as well picked up by your eye because it's off in the distance. And so we're going to do this, and because watercolor is actually kind of, it's opaque, it's not truly translucent, but it's also not truly solid either. So in order to get a nice dark, or to get nice dark trees in the foreground, we're going to need to put on several layers probably of black. At least that's what I'm assuming. Like I said, this is an adventure for me. I haven't done this particular type of thing before, but I saw it and it looked interesting, and so here I am. So, which actually kind of works out in this case perspective-wise, because if the stuff that we do in the background ends up being one layer of black, and the stuff in the front, in the foreground, ends up being 2 or 3 layers of black, then it should actually work for our perspective. It should make it look the way we want it to, which is the trees in the back are farther away from the trees in the front. So hopefully this all works out perfectly. Having, you know, said this about my frisket, and it's not working perfectly because here I am fighting with each one. But anyways, that's my theory. That's what we're going to try and do. I think that's all of my stars. When in doubt, you can actually feel, because it is latex, you can feel a bit of a rubbery feeling. And what happened to my moon, I do not know. My moon has totally just picked up all the color from my finger rubbing across the page just now. See if we can't get some of that color lifted off. The one thing about the frisket I have learned is while you have to let it dry, and while you have to let the paint dry before you can take it off, you also have to be aware of the fact that if you do it too long, if you leave it on too long, which I think I left mine on about 20 minutes, it shouldn't have, but it seems to have glued itself to my page and pulled off the surface of my paper where the moon was. The stars seem to be okay, but the moon I'm going to have to work on. So if you can ignore the fact that my moon is all messed up right now, I may have to go back in later with some actual white and fix it. But in the meantime, we're going to work on the trees. So note to self, when you're doing this, or if you're doing this, don't leave your frisket on very long. Or, actually the problem is I buy cheap paper. I'm a bit of a cheapskate, especially when I'm learning, like, or practicing, which is what I'm doing with this. I'm learning, and I don't like to waste a lot of money on things that I know aren't going to be sell-worthy, aren't going to be good enough to go up on my wall, because I'm still learning and because it's practice. So for practice art, which is what I'm doing, I buy the cheaper stuff. So I think this whole pad cost me $12 or something at Michael's. And I could have gone up a level and got the stuff that cost me $20, but most of this pad has been just kind of building up in a pile on my desk because I'm learning from what I'm doing. I'm not assuming I'm going to be able to sell anything that I'm doing now, because it's just not good enough. Like, it's good for me, I'm proud of it, but I don't think it would sell to a customer. I just don't. Now, I've been using this brush for my background, and I'm going to continue to use it just to fill in the bottom part, because this whole bottom part is going to be black, and I don't want to waste my time using my little brush for that. But I do have my smaller, pointier brush that I plan to use for the tops of the trees and such, a little more detailed. So I'm just going to start out by putting a wash of black on the bottom where my land is, because, as I said, this is all going to be black. I don't intend to put trees right down to the front edge because that's just too much work. Basically, this is just going to be plain foreground. I don't want the white to show through because that wouldn't look realistic. And my page is starting to buckle quite a lot, so I'm just going to sneak over here and see if I can't put my clip down just to keep that corner from doing what it's doing. Nope, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because it's going to lift my page up. So, excuse me for 1 sec. I'm going to actually take my page off my book. All right, so we're back. Am I lined up where you can see? There we go. So I don't really care if I get any of this on my table because I can wash it off. I just want it to be a nice even layer of black, like so. And then we're just going to start basically with the lines that are going to be the trees. As I said, I don't know if you've been paying attention to what I've been babbling, but I've never really done this before. So we're winging it. We really are. But basically, trees start out with trunks. And I'm not worried if they don't go all the way to the bottom. Some of them break off here and there. Some of them aren't very straight. And some of them go thick, thin, because trees aren't perfect. And I'm not perfect. So obviously, I'm not going to expect perfection. Some trees are taller than other trees. There we go. And have a few shorter ones here and there, but for the most part, I want most of my woods, my trees, to be off to the sides. It doesn't make sense to have a gap with no reason. So I will put a couple smaller trees here. I just don't want the focus to all be in one area. All right. So at this point, we're just going to start making our trees. And obviously they get bigger at the bottom. They're not all even. I could go from here out, like so as well. It gives me a nicer point. So it doesn't really matter which way we go. And again, it doesn't matter if the tree looks perfect or not, because trees aren't perfect. Nature's beautiful, nature's amazing, but it's not perfect. And you can see up here, there's just enough water left, I think, in my blue that it's allowing it to bleed a little bit, but that's okay too, because it is a silhouette, so it doesn't, like, you know, you're not expecting to see every detail of everything that's going on in a silhouette. You're expecting just to see outlines. See, I think it's something to do with the way my hand works. It works better for me to go out from one side and in from the other. And actually down here, I'm going to make sure I fill it right in so that it's solid. Nope. So again, as you can see, these trees, because the black is watercolor, are fairly opaque. You can still see kind of the background colors behind them and through them, which is fine because, like I said, it's our first layer. As we add layers, it should, I hope, block off enough of the background colors to look less opaque. And if the ones that are showing opaque through should give off the impression of being farther away. That's my thought. I don't know how it's going to work, but that's my thought. So there's my first group of trees. I'm going to do this one a little bit different. I want him to look like one of those other types of very scraggly looking, there's different kinds of pine trees out there. Some are more scraggly looking than others. Some of them, like this, have all even branches, and some of them have a main branch that comes out with little offshoots. And some of those you'll notice there's a gap in the branches, or all of the branches end up coming out of one side. It has something to do with probably the wind or the sun. Or the wind is too strong, so the branches can't grow on that side, or there's just not enough sunlight to be worth it for them to grow on that side. So these trees are usually very uneven and splotchy. But they're interesting. Visually, they're quite interesting, because they don't do what you expect them to do. As you can see, where the pigment's collecting, it's darker, which is fine. I'm not too worried about, like I said, perfection in any way, shape, or form. And if it pools in certain spots, that's probably just going to give it a bit more depth. Let me actually put a bit of extra in here to see if I can get some of these to pool a little bit, because that's where the color is coming from. Give it a bit more uneven texture so it looks more natural. The problem I normally have with trees is I love to be symmetrical, and it's just not, that's not a natural look. It makes me happy to be symmetrical, but it doesn't look realistic for trees and things to be symmetrical, because they're just not. It's just not the way it works. So when I do that, I'm kind of screwing up my own. This one's going to be quite bushy. I'm screwing up my own artwork by trying to make it the way I want it that's not realistic. And I have a very hard time doing what I'm doing right now. I do. But I'm going to give it a shot. I don't think I'm OCD in any way, shape, or form, but I do have certain things that bother me, and that's why I can never really... Some artists are very good at doing things that are asymmetrical. Like, you know, the focus is on one side of the page or the other, and there's just enough stuff to balance it out. But I am not one of those people. I can never, ever leave it so that it's stronger on one side than the other. I just can't bring myself to do it. I always end up adding and adding and adding, and the next thing you know, it's even on both sides. Ooh, that branch totally didn't look right. So eventually I learned that it's just not my forte, and I try to avoid anything that might even look remotely like it's supposed to be asymmetrical, because I know I can't do it. I just can't do it. Now this tree I think we're going to do so he's all on this side, because none of my trees have been like that yet. So he wants to stand out and be a little different. So he's going to have some stuff hanging out one way or another. Okay, so we're getting there. As you can see, definitely not perfect. Well, that's kind of the whole point. I like perfection, I just don't make perfection, because that's just not, it takes patience. There are some people that could do the most beautiful, absolutely perfect work ever. I have so much respect for those people, and they will take hours doing prep work and redrawing and pre-drawing and getting it just absolutely perfect, and then they will spend hours more doing things that are layered, all these different colors and techniques, and it's just absolutely wonderful. But I can't bring myself to do that. Now I'm gonna, since I've got most of my trees organized here, I'm gonna just add a little bit of rough scrub-like edging to my ground, because obviously it's not meant to be a perfectly straight line. Okay, so there's my first layer of trees. My ground has dried, so I'm going to add some more black to my ground, because again, we're trying to get it eventually so that it's quite dark, but we're doing it in stages because I don't want to stick my hand on a wet ground to do my trees. So, one layer down. And it's not too bad. I mean, like I said, it's quite opaque still. You can see through quite a lot of it, which is not what we're aiming for in the long run. So now I'm going to add some slightly thicker stems, because these ones are closer. So it may not be as big of a tree as some of the ones in the background, but it's going to have a thicker stem, just for a perspective basis. And hopefully, when the things getting closer to us are darker and thicker, it will trick our eye into thinking that they're closer. That's my goal. That one turned out to be quite thick. All right, so here we go again. I'm gonna do one of these. I didn't get one of these weird off-kilter ones on this side before, so we're gonna do him now. And we're just painting right over top of the branches from the other trees, because obviously they're behind this tree, so it's okay. This is why our perspective should work. If we do it all in layers, it should actually come out looking like one tree sits in front of the other tree, which is farther back in the distance. And I'm just laying in some extra dark for the stem, or the tree trunk, whatever you want to call it, in the hopes of, again, helping our perspective by making it look darker and closer. This guy here, he's going to be a half-dead tree, I think. He's going to have some branches that don't have a lot going on, because that happens. You get trees that aren't at their best anymore, and they just kind of sit there like skeletons. So that's what he's doing. This guy is going to be a basic, big fat pine tree. Since he's so fat to start with, I might as well make use of that. Might as well make use of it. turned out a little odd. So the trees are blending into each other. Sometimes it makes it a little hard to tell where one tree stops and one tree starts, but that's okay because at night you can't really tell that anyways. At night, all you're seeing really is where the outline edges are against the sky. So the sky provides just the only piece of interest really in it. The only light around comes from the sky. Everything else is black. My mother used to call that magic time. We used to love that as a kid. We'd wait around for magic time to happen. Because magic time was when everything was black. No matter what color it actually was, all you could see was the black. Now, as you see, when I put the dark color in, it's going to bleed to wherever it's already wet. It should only spread really to what's already wet. So it kind of gives you a little bit of control over where it goes. Not a lot, but a little. This guy's got kind of a, there we go, that's better. Because my page had warbled, it was all sitting in one puddle, which isn't necessarily the most realistic way for it to be. Now this is going to be one big towering guy here. He's going to have all sorts of funky branches. Because he can. All right, so we're getting there. I'm going to stop again and add one more layer of dark. To our ground, which is starting to be fairly dark. And we're going to let these trees dry a little bit so the next layer doesn't run into them as much. But I think all things considered, we're doing pretty good. The one thing I am going to have to do, though, at some point I'm going to have to fix my... see if I can get this to work. This is actually a watercolor pencil crayon. And it may not work because the purple part has sunk into, or soaked into, the bits of paper that were rough. But when you get the watercolor pencil crayon wet, it will lay on some color, so we'll see if it gives me enough white to balance out. So it looks like the moon. I mean, I suppose the moon could have a bit of a purple tint just from reflection, but I don't want it to look quite as dark as it was. So we'll see. Maybe that'll work. This is the part that makes me kind of crazy, because I really would like to just keep going, But I know that if I do, it's just going to end up with a whole bunch of really wet parts that aren't necessarily what I'm looking for. I want it to be dark, which is great. But I don't want it to pool so much in one area that the paper just ends up being one big wrinkled mass. So there's a couple things I'm just going to spread out a bit so that it doesn't do that. And it's easy enough to do that. When you get one of these puddles, if you don't like the puddle, you can either soak it up by using a dry brush, putting your dry brush in it, and it'll soak up a certain amount of that color, if that's how you want to do it. That was an example. I really didn't want that to happen. I might do it here, actually, just because it's too much. Or you can simply just guide it to where you want it to go. You can say, okay, well, I don't want you to be in this spot. I want you to be in this spot. I want you to come over here a little bit instead. And that usually works a certain amount too. Because it is, like I say, it is water. It'll flow to wherever you tell it to flow. Did I have one in there? I did. I have one in there I haven't done yet. Maybe that was that tree there. Well, now he's darker. As you can see, I'm really not good at just sitting here doing nothing while I wait. I really should. That's probably half my problem. I can't let it dry before I play with it, and then it's when things start running together. But the beauty of this should be that because it's black anyways, it shouldn't matter all that much if it does run together. As long as the shapes remain the shapes that I want them to be, it should be okay. That one's got a weird top to it. I think I want him to have a bit more color up there. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3. This guy should be a little bit, he's in a foreground area. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I kind of want this guy to be closer. So I'm going to add some dark in there for him, so he stands out a bit better. I want it to balance. I don't want all the close guys on this side. I want to have some close guys on that side. That being said, I suppose you should have a branch that stands in front of this tree. There, that's a bit better. That's a bit more balanced. Not sure where this blob here came from, but I suppose that has something to do with my funky tree. I think I had a branch going over here. Maybe that's where it came from. So this tree, this tree, this tree, this tree, and this tree all seem to pop forward a little bit from where I'm standing, which is good. So we're getting our perspective going. Now, the hard part is, where do I decide where to stop? And there's a couple trees here that I really like the look of, but they are really pale and they are quite, like, so they're sitting back in the background, which is okay. That one I'm going to leave him. I'm not going to put anything around him because I like the way he turned out. But this guy here is kind of bland. So when I do my next one, I'm going to put it kind of overlaid in front of him. He's okay for the background to fill in space, but he's not a very nice looking tree. So we're just going to cover part of him up. And I also want to put something here that's going to be fairly large. It's going to take up most of that edge of that page. Just because my sky didn't really go all the way over. And so I want to kind of camouflage that. So this guy here, we're going to do him, I kind of like these frumpy lumpy trees because you don't really know what to expect from them, so they can't do them wrong. There's no standard shape for them. You can actually just do a branch and then blob if you want to. I tend to do strokes, but you don't really need to because all you're doing is adding the bulk of the leaves or needles or whatever it is, and they don't have to have their own shape per se. You don't have to do each leaf separate or anything. All you need to do is have something that represents the shape of a branch with a bunch of leaves or needles, or depending on what tree it is. It just has to give the illusion of what you want it to. So we can do it that way as opposed to this way where I was doing all these little strokes to make the branches. Kind of like the way it looks too. Might be a little more natural than that way. Now again, my sky didn't go all the way over because that's where the page attached on this side. So I'm going to camouflage it a little bit by putting a nice big tree here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put some branches out here and there. Like so. And then I'm going to blob some leafy bits onto it. And I want this one to be good and dark because this is our foreground. So I'm probably going to keep adding in more pigment on this one. Shouldn't run too much into the background because, as I said, we let it, well, we tried. We didn't let it totally dry because I'm not that patient. But it is drier than at least the background trees are nice and dry. Oops, I got a black spot. I suppose that's okay. All right, so there's that guy. This kind of looks cool because this actually looks like a tone of brown because there's no color underneath it. So it almost looks like variances in the color of the bark. I like how that turned out. That's kind of cool. So we'll extend that out a little bit more, or up, I should say, a little bit more. All right, so now this guy, same thing for this guy. I'm going to put some branches. And we're going to drop some color in. To make it nice and dark. And to put foliage on our branches. Part of the page is curled up a little bit. That's why I'm putting my finger down to try and keep it from completely bleeding into the other side. I want it to stay somewhat on this side where it belongs. So I put in lots of black. And I think this is going to be our last layer because I like the way it looks right now. And I don't want to mess with it too awful much. So what I'm going to do, I think, is there we go. There. That should help hold that down a little bit. And I'm going to put some dark in the bottom, but I'm not going to make it totally black. Well, I mean, it's already totally black, but I'm going to try and get some variations of black in the front, just to make it a little bit more interesting. And I think my paintbrush, yep, sure enough. It's an old paintbrush that I'm using, and sometimes little pieces of the paint come off and land in my paintings, which is always fun. Trying to pick it out. At least it landed in something that's not a certain shape. Alright, let's see if we can give some texture. Alright, so I kind of like it the way it is. It does have some spots that are darker, that look like they're popping out into the foreground, and there are some lighter trees that are fading into the background. It's going to still bleed a little bit, as I said, because it's wet. So as the sky did, it's going to continue to spread and bleed, and some of the darker patches that are pooling are going to dry a little differently than the parts that are not pooling, so we're going to have some darker patches that way. So I'm hoping that we end up with a nice variation that gives us some depth. Some leaves are darker than others, they stand forward. So we'll see how that turns out when it's all done. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope you liked it. I hope that, like me, you decide that watercolor is something that's worth doing a little bit of practice and trying it out and seeing, because there's so many different things you can do with so many different techniques with watercolor that you can't do with anything else, just because the other stuff isn't really meant to bleed into each other the way that watercolor does. I mean, it will a certain degree, but in many paints, when they bleed together, it's kind of more like producing a mud effect that you don't want. Whereas in watercolors, most of the effect you do want comes from the bleeding. So it's fun to play with. Even if sometimes I'm not happy with my work, it is still fun to do. It's just something that's relaxing, and you can just kind of free for all, go nuts, do whatever you want and see what happens. And you can't do that with many different art forms. So as much as my lack of control sometimes bothers me, it is also balanced out by the fact that it's an adventure and you can just kind of wait and see what happens. And that makes it fun. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back and see some of my other videos, or go and take a look on my blog. I don't always video things because, like I said, I'm still learning and I'm still practicing, and I'm not sure if you really want to be along for that ride. Sometimes it takes me a very long time to get something finished because I have to keep going back in and touching up the parts I'm not happy with. And that would end up being like 5 video series just to do one painting. I'm not sure if you guys are up to that or not. If you are, let me know. I try to assume that most of my videos are going to be about an hour long, or at least each part will be an hour long or less if possible. If I don't talk through the videos, I have now eventually figured out how to speed them up. At least I hope I did. I just tried to speed up my mandala video that I did, so we'll see if that works. And if I can figure out how to time-lapse it a bit so you don't have to watch the entire hour-long process, I will do that, and I will hopefully shut my mouth long enough that you don't have to hear the chipmunks screaming in the background when I do speed it up. So, as I said, go visit the blog and you will find the other paintings that I've been doing, the finished products that are posted on the blog. And if anyone's interested, I can try and do a video of some of how they went. I'm not sure I'll be able to reproduce exactly the same because obviously I winged it the first time around. But if anyone is interested, you can let me know and we will see what we can do. Now that I've figured out how to get my camera above my work, it's great. So talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye.